why did Tabari reject canonical readings?
Yeah, that's a good one. So yes, canonical readings can be rejected, and at some point they can't be anymore. So Tabari, that we're talking about, is one of the great early exegetes. He lives in the end of the 3rd Islamic century, and he wrote a big exegesis and also a big history, and he wrote a lot of things, and he was brilliant. But he wrote an exegesis of the Quran, and he talks about the different variant readings. And he'll evaluate them. He says, well, some people read this, some people read that, and I think this is better. Or both of them are fine. And sometimes he says, this is garbage. You can't do this. You can't recite it like this. And some of those are canonical readings today. Of course, when he's writing, they're not, right? There is no canon of the canonical readers until, well, actually his lifetime. So he dies a bit before Ibn Mujahid, but they were both from Baghdad, and they knew each other, probably, but they're contemporaneous. And then Ibn Mujahid canonizes it, and after that it becomes, well, at least even after that, people still reject readings every now and then. They're like, no, I think this is better. And it becomes more careful. They're less, this is wrong, but they'll still say, I think this is better. I think this fits better. This is more fitting, etc. And then around the 700s Hijri, something changes. And I must say, I mean, this actually requires research, figuring out where does that shift kind of take place. And technically, Shadi Nasser has done some of this in his book, but it's a really interesting thing where all of a sudden when you get to people like Abu Hayyan, who wrote the Bahr al-Muhit, which is an enormous exegesis, incredibly eloquent. But to him, the idea that you could suggest that one of these readings, which are, of course, mutawatir, he was very clear about this. To him, there was tawatur. How dare you even suggest that it's incorrect? I mean, that's impossible because we have a good chain, and he was a pure Arab, and all these things come up, and it's like, no, you can't reject these readings anymore. There's a tension that comes up in my mind, but we might have to talk about that some other time.
Yeah. That's
but there's an interesting question. I'll do it very quickly. So there's an interesting question about what makes a reading valid, and there are always 3 things. It has to agree with the rasm, which is interesting because the rasm didn't exist at the time that the Prophet existed, right? That was sometime after him. So it has to agree with the rasm. It has to have a good chain of transmission, and it has to have good Arabic grammar. But of course, at some point, this chain of transmission becomes so important that, like, well, the chain of transmission is good, so it can't be bad Arabic, right? Because the chain of transmission is perfect. We know that it went back to a person who had impeccable standards. So if he considered it proper Arabic, it's proper Arabic. So that can't be wrong. So the requirement of proper Arabic starts dropping away, while before, like in the time of Tabari, it was perfectly reasonable to say some of these readings were wrong, and wrong for grammatical reasons. But at some point, that kind of rationality about that gets relegated to, no, chain of transmission is the only thing that matters. Even though in form, people still say the 3 things matter, but that's not true. The only thing that matters is the chain of transmission these days. And what's even interesting, so not only Tabari rejects readings, even Ibn Mujahid himself, so the guy who canonized the 7 readings, in his book that became the canon of the 7 readings, there's a couple of times where he says, no, I think this is wrong. He's wrong about this. And even so, he's the student of one of the transmitters of Ibn Kathir. He said, no, I think my teacher is wrong here, that this can't be right. The end. Right, so that's it. So that's really interesting, and that totally shifts at some point, to the point that right now these readings are totally unassailable. They were perfectly assailable. They were even assailable to the person who canonized themselves. So that's a really interesting kind of thing that is going on. Yeah.